Microsoft has a major org change, Xbox does some layoffs, and the PS Pro, well, we know more details now. Happy Friday, friends. It is Friday. Another week in September has come, it has gone, and hopefully you had a wonderful week. It was a very nice week here weather-wise. We need rain, although if you're down in the southern part of the United States, hopefully you are doing okay with the hurricane and everything else that's going on down that way. But there was a lot that happened in the Microsoft world, but not a lot of headlines. And you'll see what I mean here in a second. And we're going to dive deep here on some of this Activision stuff because, hey, there's something else really going on here. So let's dive into the details here. We're going to kick it off with the tech news. So hopefully you had a wonderful week. Here we go. So kicking things off, Microsoft has a new chief operating officer. Her name is Carolina Dybeck. I believe Happy is how you pronounce that last name, Happe. Either way, this is the first COO. And if you've been around the Microsoft block for a little bit here, since Kevin Turner. So this has been a hole in the org chart since actually, I think 2016. So the better part of 8 years, maybe closer to 9 years at this point. So they have a new COO. I guess the time was right. Either way, she's going to be taking over, by the way, commerce and ecosystem organization, Microsoft digital IT team, which was under Rajesh Jha, and also the business operations unit in the finance department. So she's taken things from various different leaders and putting them back into the COO position. And so there you go. Also happening this week at the Microsoft campus, I guess, was the Security Summit. Now, if you remember that little CrowdStrike incident that happened over the summer, this was the summit, if you will, that happened from it. And so far, it's all talk. It's literally it. The goal here still seems to be Microsoft getting their vendor partners out of the kernel, because that was part of the big problem. And of course, those vendor partners who aren't named CrowdStrike are they're probably not super happy about all this. But either way, here we are. So Microsoft says things are happening, but until they announce them and implement them, it's all talk and whatever else. Other things that are happening, legacy DRM support is being pulled from Windows Media Player on Windows 7, Windows 8, and here's a name you haven't heard in a while, Silverlight. So yeah, that is all happening. And Microsoft Ignite, it was one of my favorite conferences when I was going to all the Microsoft conferences. I was going to say back in the day, just a few short years ago. Either way, this one is happening in Chicago from November 18th to the 22nd. You can now buy a ticket if you want. Now this is definitely targeted IT professionals. I believe it's over $2,000 to go and grab your ticket. This is not the first time they've had it in Chicago. Last time they had it in Chicago, it was kind of it was not good. But Chicago in November, what can go wrong? Either way, if I can enunciate, that is now available. You can go register for that stuff and head on up to Chicago, get yourself some deep dish and some Chicago hot dogs while you are in town. But the bigger news of the week for sure was happening. I don't know. The new COO of Microsoft is pretty monumental at the end of the day. But the bigger news of the week, sort of on the inverse side, was happening over on the Team Xbox side. Now, a couple weeks ago on this very podcast, I mentioned that changes were coming. And I also tweeted this out as at the end of August. I was like, ruh-roh. I don't like to speculate too much about layoffs. But so this one obviously came to fruition as I expected here. And there were 650 staff cut from the gaming division. Now, gaming division as a whole, but it was primarily targeted at Activision. And Phil Spencer sent out an email really early, by the way. It was 3 a.m. or something like that. A very atypical timing, just odd timing in general. But either way, that email went out, read by a million lawyers before it did, I'm sure, and announced all the layoffs. However, in that email, he made it very clear that no studios were closing, no games were being canceled or anything like that. This is purely off the top, the over the head, margin reducing roles. And I'm not trying to discount anybody who is in these positions. Layoffs suck. But I would imagine this means it's corporate support, accounting, marketing, and those things where there were just redundancies across the team. And unfortunately, Microsoft is a business and they do these things. However, this is up to, I think over 2,500 roles have now been cut from Activision / Blizzard in those studios. It is worth noting that Microsoft is not alone in cutting headcount. This has sort of been the trend in the industry, unfortunately, that the gaming companies hired up heavily during the early 2020s because of everybody at home playing games. And then now, like, the market's a bit normalizing here. And so, yeah. And which kind of leads me down to this, which is financial documentation, which is always my favorite. Because I've hypothesized at some point Microsoft might have a write down, not a write off of these assets. Because at the end of the day, they paid nearly $70 billion for this acquisition. However, one thing I had forgotten to think about in all of this is a little thing called goodwill, which is... there's going to be a CPA listening to this and who is probably going to write in and correct me, and that is perfectly fine. It's been a few years since I've been doing GAAP compliance work, but I still understand what goodwill is. So this is watered down by all means, but goodwill typically refers to the purchase cost minus the fair market value of the tangible assets and the liabilities. And humans speak, that would mean like, okay, so Microsoft went out and bought Activision and paid $70 billion. On paper, they don't actually think Activision is worth $70 billion, but that was the money that was required to buy the company. And so there's a difference between how much the money costs to buy the company and what you think the assets are worth. And the assets being like things that produce revenue, right? Or could be sold to make money, like the actual games, the studios, and everything else. And so the goodwill charge that Microsoft put into its financial documents was nearly $51 billion in goodwill. Now, this is where things get murky, okay? This is just, bear with me here. But roughly and generally speaking, that means Microsoft thinks that Activision is actually worth, like, that just the assets are worth around $20 billion or something like that. So there's $50 billion in that sort of goodwill slush fund. And now there's reasons for this, right? The brand Activision had value. I mean, today it still has value, but the brand Activision prior to being acquired by Microsoft, it meant something. It stood for something. And so now that Microsoft has acquired Activision and it's being shoved under Xbox, that thing that previously had value doesn't have as much value, and it's intangible, meaning like I can't just go grab an Activision off the shelf and sell it. And there's all sorts of this mumbo jumbo stuff in there, and that falls under the goodwill. Now, the write-down that could potentially happen here, and this is going to be tough to work through, but it does feel like Microsoft, they paid a lot of money. And so with the goodwill, it would be known as a goodwill impairment, meaning that the goodwill was like overstated or something like that. So I still think at the end of the day, Microsoft might do some adjustments to these assets for financial reasons that effectively means they overpaid. We got to remember that when Microsoft actually bought Activision, and I mean like the deal closed, I believe the share price was at $75 per share. However, Microsoft paid $95 a share, a premium of $20 per share. I mean, that's a pretty healthy premium over the closing price, roughly speaking, in January of 2022. Of course, if you look at when, I should say, it was not $75 when it closed, meaning when they made the acquisition, but when they announced it, right? Because after that, Microsoft comes out and says they're going to pay $95 a share. Shares are $75. Investors are going to snatch all those up and be like, look, that's $20 per share, easy money at the end of the day. All that being said, assuming it closed and all that stuff. However, Microsoft paid a lot of money, and the reality is they have to show and prove that it was actually worth that kind of money, unless they find out, hey, maybe it's really not, right? Especially in 2024, the gaming industry has changed significantly, and we will see. And a write-down is very different than a write-off. So a write-off means like you're just chucking the asset out into the ocean, you're never using it. A write-down just means that it's just not worth as much money as you really kind of thought it was. And it's not uncommon, but I will be curious to see if any of this happens. And indicators of things like this might happen would be like, hey, if there's a huge miss on Game Pass subscriber growth, like if the revenue for Xbox like starts to go down, even including Activision's revenue that they are bringing in. Remember, Microsoft will be breaking that out into its own entity for 12 months. I think that's what the regulation rule is. Like, it could be wrong on that. And so these are the indicators that like I love to watch for. It's like, okay, you guys had this huge asset. What if, like, imagine, here's a scenario. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but imagine Call of Duty comes out, Call of Duty Black Ops 6 comes out, and it bombs, right? Like it just tanks. And typically for Activision, that was like $1 billion weekend is what I'd like to say. And let's just say it's only a $250 million weekend. That is dramatic for Microsoft and for their evaluation of this asset that they just bought. And so these things can all play into it. So Super interesting stuff going on there. This fall will really help us understand the performance of Activision under Microsoft, especially this holiday shopping season. Game Pass subscriptions are the thing to be watching. By the way, Game Pass Standard, I think I have that wired up here. Is that this one? Yeah. Is now available too, by the way. So that's, I think, $14.99 or $14.99 per month. It is missing things like no day one game releases, no EA library, no cloud gaming. So like if you're serious about Xbox, you probably have Ultimate. That is what I currently pay for. And so, yeah. Then there was also this thing, which I'm very thankful that Microsoft is bringing back, the Friends like system, right? Microsoft pivoted to this almost like social media-esque. You can now follow people, and it never worked. Everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, I'm sure there's somebody who liked it. I did not like it at all, right? It like you can just follow people and then they could spam them. It seemed to lead to a rise in a lot of bot activity, especially like trying to sell and like hawk like gaming cards or prepaid game cards and scams and all that stuff. And so Microsoft is rolling it back, I believe. I don't know if follows will still exist, but either way, they're rolling it back to the classic friend experience, which is so much better, where you got to send a request, and then you can't see if somebody's online unless they've accepted that friend request. So things like that. I'm happy they're bringing that back. That is the good news on that side. And then you cannot ignore the juggernaut in the industry. The PlayStation 5 Pro announced, and there's been a lot of discourse about it, right? The biggest being not its performance, not its capabilities, but simply the $700 price point. There's two ways to interpret this. There is one saying that, hey, this is just what the market is, right? Consoles need to get more expensive if we expect more performance, and this is just what it costs Sony to do it, and that's just the state of the industry, and you better get used to $700 consoles going forward. The other side of it is also like, hey, Xbox just like has proven it's not a threat to Sony's business anymore, and so they're going to take a bigger risk, and they are going to charge more money for a premium console that only PlayStation can do right now because Xbox is not bringing out any competition. So if you want the best console with the best fidelity, it's a PlayStation 5 Pro at $700. So that is the other way to be thinking about this. It's promising things like 4K 60, but as we already know, 4K being the resolution, 60 frames per second being the baseline, as we already know, thanks to some reporting elsewhere, is that, or they're just posts on Twitter, I should say, is that some games will still run at 30 frames per second. So we are far from the scenario where all games on PlayStation Pro are guaranteed to be 60 frames per second, which was actually the dream of this generation from like, I don't know, however many years ago that was, 4 years ago. It's like the Series X and PlayStation 5 are going to give us 4K 60, and that is the benchmark. And as we all know, that has not really worked out anyway. So we'll see what this console can do. We will see. And at the end of the day, you know what? I wish Sony the best. And it's just one thing to keep in mind. I keep saying this because it's going to come up in headlines all over the place. Sony's hardware revenue will go up much higher than Xbox, because Xbox is launching a quote-unquote refresh, but it's really just the same console with 2 terabytes of storage, and that's really about it for the most part. And it does come with a disk drive, by the way. Remember, $700 the PlayStation 5, no disk drive and no vertical stand. So you're looking at $800 before taxes if you want to experience the latest and greatest from the PlayStation side. So we'll see. We will see. Not going to be down on it until it's whatever. So, all right. On to the questions of the week. As you guys know, is always my favorite part. Warhammer Dave says, this is a great question. If Xbox gets Steam on its consoles, why would developers continue to make games for Xbox Digital Store when they can just make the same version for Steam and get access to all the Xbox gamers? Devs would save time and money. Just making Steam ports. Here's the one. There's two parts to this question. So why would developers continue to do this? First off, Microsoft has a boatload of studios. Those studios will not stop making Xbox games, right? I think that's a given. The integration that comes with the Xbox platform. It really would behoove Microsoft to figure out how to make integrating Xbox Live experiences seamless into PC games. That is something I'm sure they're trying to do, but I get it. It's nitty gritty and it's challenging. Here's the other thing that you're missing on why devs would continue to do this. It boils down to one thing: money. Microsoft, I follow what you're saying, but imagine that Microsoft adopts a model for the next generation console that really is just like a PC game. Microsoft goes to them and says, look, here's your PC title. We will give you, imagine it's an indie studio. We'll give you $5 million to build the Xbox framework in. Here's all the documentation, how to do it. Go do that, please, for us. For $5 million, will you do it? And they'll say yes. And they say, no, we won't do it for that. It's not enough money. Okay, Microsoft, remember, has a near unlimited war chest behind it. Yes, they are determined to make, they have to make money, and they've spent a lot of money, but they make unlimited amounts of money. And so they can just quite literally buy their way into this. So, that's the other side of this. And for Microsoft, that would actually be very, very cheap. Imagine getting a title into your platform. It's like $10 million, and then they probably make something, right? The royalty on whatever. And that's a model too we haven't even explored. It's like, look, if you add this Xbox stuff to it, we won't charge you a royalty until you hit $1 million in game sales on Xbox. So then it's more risk-free for both sides at the end of the day. Warhammer also says, he says, if Game Pass fails to get 10 million new subscribers with COD on day one, when we see Microsoft cut day one first-party games from Game Pass, or maybe shutter Game Pass, I doubt they will shutter Game Pass. That would be the most shocking thing to me at all, because here's the scenario that you can't say won't happen. They would spin out Xbox, I think, before they would shutter Game Pass. I really firmly believe that, because to build all that up again, they would be just writing off a huge cash flow asset for the new entity, and it would really devalue things. Now, for 10 million subscribers and COD day one, well, that's a bit of a loaded question, because right now there's already been the beta, which if you were a Game Pass subscriber, you got early access to. And so they should hopefully, in theory, or in practice, I should say, be getting signups, right? They should already be trending up. So it may not be a 10 million on day one, but I think it would be more respectable or understandable to quantify it as 10 million over the launch period, right? So let's just say, when was the first beta? August 15th to August whatever for when the game launches. I think that would be a better metric. And I don't know if 10 million makes sense. This is the number you came up with. Maybe I said it at some point, but either way, I think we can all agree Microsoft absolutely has a number internally that they're trying to hit. There's no question about it. That's a KPI. That's a given. That's how business works. Is that number 10 million? I don't know. We will find out. Well, I don't know if we will ever find out. If somebody does find out, slide into the DMs, if you will. Slide into the DMs. So, next question here coming from, if what this loads. Let's see. Mr. PKI. He says, coincidentally, it is Friday the 13th and layoffs were announced. Was it only Xbox teams? I don't know if it was only Xbox teams, so I can't say that definitively, because I believe there may have been other reaches from within Microsoft, right? But it was definitely impacted, from what we understand so far, the heaviest, right? 650 from a single division that's a big cut. That's a big cut. Yes, they've got tens of thousands, so on a percentage basis, it's probably pretty small, but either way, it was still pretty big. Mr. PK with a double dose for the second question. He says, do you think there is any changes coming to Windows based on the Windows Endpoint Security Ecosystem Summit? I think there will be changes coming. However, they're not going to be immediate, and they're going to be very slow, I think, if anything. I do think they will do something, because here's the scenario that Microsoft has to avoid. This happens again, but it's not CrowdStrike. It's some name your other AV vendor who messed up an update, and this happened. Microsoft gets its butt dragged to Congress, and Congress is sitting there drilling, we'll just say Satya Nadella, and saying, look, this happened in July of 2024 or whatever, and you guys had a summit, and then it happened again in June of 2026. What did you change when you took down all the airlines? And if they come out and say, well, we changed nothing, that's going to be really, really bad. So they will try to do something, even if only superficial, but it seems clear Microsoft has been talking about getting vendors out of the kernel, but yeah. So next question from Matt O'Bear says, hey Brad, do you think the PS5 Pro 700 price point will set the new floor for console pricing in the future? I think this is an interesting question, because this is a big question, right? So if you jump up the console pricing of $700, let's say Series whatever Xbox Next is $700, there's a lot more playing room in there to drive performance and do various things when you're not worried about trying to make it up. If you're thinking like, okay, Sony's going to try this, and I think this puts more doubt into Microsoft's camp, really, if anything else, because Microsoft has already proven that even if you have the most powerful console on paper, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sell more consoles. I actually expect Microsoft not to try to target that for the next generation. I think they're going to try to undercut value or undercut pricing from whatever Sony does and increase value through things like Game Pass. I'm working on something for like how the ARM stuff works and how that could be potentially going. But yeah, I think what's going to be hilarious is like if they come out, here's the Switch 2, $199. I don't think $199. I think Nintendo would charge more than that. But either way, $299. It's going to look super inexpensive compared to a $700 PlayStation. Now, we can't discount the fact that the PlayStation 5 Pro will continue to be sold. Like, it's not like they're just clearing the deck and getting rid of that. However, all the marketing is probably going to be around mostly the PS5 Pro. And like, I can't see them doing a PS5 discount because just the baseline PS5 for a couple reasons. One, they just increased the pricing on the controllers, and clearly there's a lot of pressure to keep those prices high. And so if they do that, then there's an even bigger price gap between the PS5 and PS5 Pro. And it just doesn't sit well. It would be great if Xbox came in and just slashed everything by $50. That would give them, again, a lot of marketing win. But we will see. And it says, last question from Matt O'Bear says, do you think the release of GTA 6 will boost the Series S sales, or will consumers jump for the PS5 Pro? I think it's too soon to say because we don't know what it's going to look like on the Series S, right? The Series S has been taking a lot of beating lately in the headlines where it's saying it was a mistake sort of thing, although I don't think it was. It gets complicated, but either way, I think it's way too early to say. I think it is because what we don't know is it's coming to the, this go down a completely different bent, but it's like, yes, it's coming to the Series S, but it's only 30 frames per second at 460p or something crazy like that. Here's the other thing with the PS5 Pro. So the developers have to target this. Yes, there is some automated upscaling and all that sort of stuff, but right now I think the data supports that like still the biggest demographic is like last gen consoles, unfortunately. Like, right? If you're building a AAA title right now, you targeting the PS5 Pro is just another thing. So you're already targeting the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and then the PlayStation 5 Pro. It's just more work for the devs, unless Sony has made it like super easy to integrate, but we don't have enough experience or games launched yet to really know. I mean, it's supposed to be better, but I don't think Sony did a great job like literally showing it. They just said, here's the specs, here's the stuff, here's the things. There's 50 games coming for the PS5 Pro. I think at launch it'll be available. But the other interesting thing that came out of that Sony presentation is that most gamers chose better frame rate over fidelity. So, I don't know. There you go. And then Francisco C. wrapping it up, if you will. He says, I know this is very early to say, but after the PS5 Pro announcement and speculation of a possible GTA 6 delay, I think a lot of corporations in the gaming industry in general is putting a lot of stock in GTA 6 being the global market juggernaut on release and how it will correct all the faults of the market. I am saying this as somebody who's been waiting for more than a decade since the release of GTA 5, but I will not bet my house and car on it shattering records, and I feel a lot of companies have bet a lot on this. So this is this Matt O'Bear did not, I don't think intentionally did this, but this ties nicely together. GTA 6 is expected to be like a Call of Duty style launch, right? $1 billion weekend would at a minimum would be probably disappointing. Like, it's going to be a huge title, a huge release. Grand Theft Auto 6 has to launch in a very polished, very good state. There's no way around that for the title. The question becomes is this title truly going to lift like the entire market? I think it's going to come down to like how aggressive are they? Like, again, here's the question. Is GTA 6, I don't know, maybe I should try. Is GTA 6 going to be on PS4? I don't know. I don't actually. According to two sources, it says no is the first result. So I did not know off the top of my head. But assuming that would be, and maybe this is where Francisco's question is coming in. So GTA 6 launches, not available for PS4, definitely not on the Xbox One then. Will this be enough to raise up the industry? Well, right now the rumors are that PlayStation has locked up marketing for it, which is going to help PlayStation quite a bit. But, that's just what it is. Call of Duty did the same thing for PlayStation. It'll be on Xbox. I'm not saying it's not. That will definitely drive console sales. But is it going to be enough? Is it going to get everybody over? We don't know. It certainly has an opportunity to do it because I think it's fair to say GTA 6 is probably the most anticipated gaming title currently known about right now. And so we will see. We will see. That's a great question, by the way. Great question. They're all great questions. They're all great dogs. If you get that reference, they're all good dogs, Brent. Bort. If you get that reference, you've been on the internet for too long. So either way, guys, that wraps it up for this week. As always, love the questions, love keeping me on my toes, love just hanging out. So I don't know. I keep thinking about whether or not I could set this up as a good game streaming setup. And I've always thought about doing that, playing on the console, by the way. We'll see if I ever do it. It's just for fun. I do this for fun. Hopefully you made it to this end. And if not, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the BS on this podcast is me.